Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartofilis.
Coach Perry, how are you?
How's it going, man?
Doing good. We're really excited to have you on and really jump into just your career, kind of what led you to where you are now, the time you spent in the bubble just now. Must be good to be back for sure. To get us started with the show, I'm curious as to where this basketball, this passion came from. Right? Like, did it start when you were really young? Did it something that you kind of fell in love with as you got older? Like, where did this all begin for you?
I was a little different. I was kind of a late bloomer, I'd say. I mean, I didn't start like coming out of the womb like some people say, like with the basketball in my hands kind of thing. It was like my actually first sport was like tennis growing up. So I ended up I started playing basketball when I was in middle school a little bit, but I didn't play on any teams. Then once I got into high school, then I started getting a little more serious about it, started going to camps. So I ended up playing in high school and got a scholarship to Fresno Pacific, which is the D2. So I played there, but I didn't have any idea. Like I love basketball. I mean, everybody that grows up, they gotta have all those posters on the wall. I was subscribing to Slam magazine. I was trying to find every little thing, every little advantage you could get. Like buying jump soles. I don't know if anybody might have an older crowd, but jump soles were things that helped you get higher, like all these little gizmos and gadgets that try to improve your athleticism. So I tried all these little things, and I just always wanted to be better at basketball. But that being said, coaching it was never really a thought of mine. I graduated from Fresno Pacific and actually was trying to be an accountant. And so it's just kind of a weird way how everything worked out. I was studying to be an accountant, and then I was like away from basketball, and I couldn't really figure out how to get back into basketball. So I just started helping out, down at the local rec center. Then my buddy got a job at a local high school as a freshman coach, and I started helping him out. So kind of snowball from there, started getting into it, and just couldn't stay away from basketball, and started doing camps in the summer times. Ended up getting a job down in Cal State San Marcos. My old college coach called me in and offered me an assistant job there. And so that kind of got the ball rolling in terms of my college coaching career. Then I had some stints at a junior college, Monterey Peninsula College, where my hometown is. Around that time, the Santa Cruz Warriors came into town. They originally, I believe it was like the North Dakota Wizards, the NBA D League back then, which is the G League now. They had some really weird names. So they were like the Dakota Wizards, and they actually moved their team from there to Santa Cruz, and that was owned by Golden State. And so from there, I was doing a camp in the summertime, and I just happened to be there that day when head coach Casey Hill was doing like a little guest speaking segment for our kids. And so I kind of got him to the side and just asked him, if I could help out, just volunteer. And so from then on, I got some video experience with them. And then the next year they offered me one of their coaching associate spots. From there on, I had spent a year out of the D League or the G League back then, and did some scouting work for overseas teams. I did some scouting work for like teams in Slovakia, China, Japan, Germany. It was kind of crazy. I wasn't like traveling to all those places, but I was just doing all this stuff remotely, sending film out to these guys and scouting reports to these guys. So, and then from there, got the job with the Seattle Storm as the video coordinator. And then following season, got a job as an assistant coach for the Phoenix Suns G League team. The Northern Arizona Suns came back to the Storm. Another offer to go to the Erie BayHawks, which is the New Orleans Pelicans G League team, as an assistant coach there. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
That's awesome. And it's incredible to think about just how young you are and having all these experiences with different teams, different positions. That's really what makes this so fun and really what the show is all about. And I'm curious, I'm sure everyone probably would jump and start talking to you about the G League jobs and all that stuff. I'm curious about that first job you mentioned with the high school team. So me being in a similar position, I'm going to college, also coaching for me, it's my alma mater, my old high school. But I'm curious about, kind of get that first step of you getting into coaching, what that really looked like for you in terms of being in your early 20s, coaching a freshman team with guys that are kind of significantly younger than you in terms of like the difference in age year to year is huge at that age group, right? 1 year means a lot, but still very close, maybe number wise. And you kind of relate to them much more. What did it look like for you in building that relationship with kids in a way that an older coach can't?
For me, in this area that I'm from, it's Monterey County. And for people that don't know, it's basically Central California, or about 2 hours south of San Francisco, about 6 hours north LA. So it's not a basketball hotbed by any means, which makes it a little bit easier for me because, like when someone just says you're a college basketball player, like, or you're a former college basketball player, like kind of ears just perk up automatically. Now, like saying I'm from a D2, as opposed to D1, like that has its little benefits and disadvantages and all that stuff. But like for the most part, I think just kids knowing that I played college basketball kind of automatically grasp their attention. So I didn't really have to do too much in that sense. I think it was a good chance for me to just dabble in it and kind of understand what it is that a coach really does. You know what I mean? Like high school coaching around here I know there's other levels of it, especially even on the East Coast. I think East Coast basketball is a little more competitive in some areas or most areas. And I think that for here, it's not as important to do like all the little things, I should say. Basketball is just like a thing you do. Like it's this thing you just do when you go through high school. So for these kids, it's like just making sure that they're having fun, making sure that they were learning as much as they could. But like it wasn't a serious thing. Like it was a freshman team, and by the time it came around Christmas, like half our team was gone. Like we went from like 18 players to like 7 players because all these kids, basketball's not their passion. They're just going to go out of town, and it's not a big thing for them. So that was different for me because as a player, I was like nose to the grindstone. I'm in there getting shots every day, getting to the weight room. Like I had all this stuff that like I wanted to do as a player. But then when I saw these kids, I was like, well, that's weird. Why do these kids want to have that same passion? But you come to realize like not everybody has that type of, kind of drive that makes you want to do those type of things. So it's good. Like I wanted to exude that, and I wanted to make sure that if there's 1 or 2 kids that kind of grasp that message, then that was the main thing. Like if I can touch 1 or 2 kids where they have this motivation to say, oh, maybe I can play beyond high school, or maybe I need to do this to be better. That was the main thing when I look back at it. And it ended up being one guy that ended up playing college basketball out of that group. So that was the one guy. He came up to me after, I think a couple of years ago, he actually messaged me and he just said, yeah, that was like an influence on him that helped him understand what it took to be a college basketball player. So, I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what I was looking for. Like in retrospect, in the moment, I didn't think about any of that stuff. So.
That's great. And thank you for sharing that, because it's thinking about maybe the sides of guys that don't play well, kind of maybe a lot of coaches that come on the show will kind of just touch on, oh, well, guys, our guys work hard. Our guys always work hard instead of bringing up the reality of some guys don't. One of the best piece of advice I've ever had from the show was Brandon Snyder coming on and telling me, not everyone's Kobe, right? You might want them to all be Kobe and work really hard and stay in the gym really long. And that's kind of maybe what you feel like you were, or what your kind of projection of them should be. But that's just not the reality. And the earlier you kind of realize that, and now that I've realized that, it's taken a lot of the stress out of it and made me say, okay, you know what? The guys that do, I'm going to give them everything I can, and the guys that don't, that's who they are. And it's of course important to realize that. And thank you for sharing. I'm curious too. Then, so obviously you had that experience of coaching at that level, seeing the differences between what you had experienced in college at that level, and you obviously went to go coach in college. All that stuff is so cool in seeing both worlds of it. You kind of touched on a little bit about the getting this job with Santa Cruz Warriors, and that one day in the gym, coach comes to give a clinic presentation, you go and ask him a question. A lot of people listening to the show, that's like their worst. It's their biggest, what they're hopeful for is that moment will happen, but they're thinking about the result. The actual act of going up to said coach at the event is the scariest thing in the world. Can you kind of talk about maybe what was going through your head, what made you want to do that, and how important that decision to go on a limb was for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that question asked to me too, several times from, aspiring prospects, like people that want to get into this business. And I'd say, like, I give you that story as an example, but like, I've had plenty of no's, trust me. I've had plenty of like, not even, oh, well, coach isn't in now, so like, you can't talk to him. Well, is coach ever going to be in? Well, technically, coach is never going to be in for you, kind of thing. So it's like, I keep banging on the door. I'm not the type of person that likes to be annoying, if that in a sense. Like there's a fine line being persistent and then being like a pest, right? So it's like, I try to be persistent, but for me, it's like respecting other people's personal space, respecting their time. And just sometimes it doesn't work out, you know what I mean? Like it's this opportunity has to be perfect for a lot of people, and kind of a believer in fate in a sense, because Like a lot of times when I look back at things, it's like, well, this didn't work out, that didn't work out, but like there's a reason, because that all led me to this opportunity that I had right now. So just to give you an example, like the Santa Cruz coach, Casey Hill, might have said yes to me, but used to go to Stanford camps, and I used to try to get a hold of Johnny Dawkins, or I used to try to find, the director of operations, which his name was Jeff Lemire at the time. Like I would try to just hang around them and just talk to them. I used to go to UCLA camps. I just try to hang around, talk to Doug Erickson, who was their Dobo, and I tried to talk to Steve Alford. Like I tried to do all those things, like, but I wasn't like a pest about it. You know what I mean? Like I would just chat with them, and if it worked out, it worked out. It didn't. So some of it has to be natural, and some of you understand if you talk to these people and you feel like it's natural, then usually it works out. And it also helps too when you have a middleman. So everyone talks about connections, right? So that day, it's like you can avoid a text, you can kind of avoid a phone call, but like when you're in person and you have boss at that time, who was the director of the camps, I had him actually go grab Casey first and then like talk to him and say like, hey, can you talk to one of our counselors? So I use that as like a tool. So just trying to think outside the box, finding ways of getting basically in that elevator per se, that elevator pitch that everyone always talks about. So I was trying to get in that elevator with Casey just to like pitch what I could do for him. So in a sense, maybe I was so seasoned that I was like, oh, well, I'll talk to him. And if he says no, he says no. Like you had built up that callus over time where people were saying no to you so much, or you got no responses that didn't really faze me. So when he said yes, I was like, oh, okay. Oh, that's awesome, kind of thing. So like in retrospect, I think it was just the right timing more than anything else.
100%. That's kind of a huge thing behind this show too. I mean, I've heard no's from thousands of people asking to come on the show. I mean, you only need kind of the one yes to get everything started, and then obviously it's kind of like a domino effect. So it's great to think about the one time it actually worked for you. And then with that Santa Cruz, can you kind of go into depth as to what a kind of a coaching associate does? It's just in terms of a title, maybe one we don't hear too often. And I'm curious as to kind of how that role was different than the ones you've had since then.
For me, the D League back then wasn't. I think it was only like 18 teams at that point. It's 28 teams now. So it's grown tremendously since then. A lot of the Warriors are good about resources to their D-League team, but at that time, it wasn't as much as, you would think they would get. I mean, it was actually coming off a championship year too. So my first year, the year I volunteered, was the year we won the championship in the D-League. And then the next year was when I got the coaching associate spot. So what ended up happening, the year they won the championship, they actually had 2 assistant coaches. And the year after, they decided to take away the second assistant spot and then just hire a bunch of interns. Basically, the coaching associate was supposed to be kind of like an intern role, but I was the only one out of all the interns that had actual coaching experience, especially at the college level. And so I got thrown in the fire a little bit. And one of our there was 3 interns, and then one of them actually got let go. And so I got thrown into the fire and with all these responsibilities. So I ended up being essentially the second assistant. I was writing scouting reports, having film sessions. I was talking through walkthroughs in front of the team. So like I got just thrown, as much of a sense of the word thrown in the fire, the phrase thrown in the fire. I was like, literally, my eyes were wide open. Like that year was such a blur to me. Like it was pretty crazy to go back and think about it, but it made me that much better. So for a lot of people, coaching associates, like even in the NBA, it's not like an assistant coach. I mean, you're basically like an assistant coach in training. So you'll get these little projects here. You'll get parts of scouting reports. You'll get part of film breakdown and stuff like that. But you're not a full-on assistant coach. But for me, at that moment, I was an assistant coach. Like I was doing all this stuff. Like, I mean, I can remember days where I was like waking up and driving players to the gym, making sure I was throwing the laundry in, setting up the loops. And then I had to go and make sure I was writing the next scouting report, or I was going and making sure I was ready for the next film session. I had to make sure I was ready for PD on the court with players. So like those days were full. Like I was waking up at 6 a.m., probably wouldn't go to bed till midnight on at least 5 out of the 7 days. And especially game days, like you don't even get any sleep. So yeah, I think all to that being said, that was essentially what it all encompassed. Like that's, to me, that shaped my career more than anything else, because it forced me to get out of my comfort zone more than anything.
That's so huge, and it's so awesome thinking about how that role in terms of being an assistant, kind of playing the role of an assistant coach, even though you weren't by title, is great to think about, just getting that experience with the G League at the time, the D League. such a small staff. Definitely a lot to do there, and getting thrown to the fire is so important. I'm thinking a little bit about some of your later roles before we talk about the BayHawks. Things like when you were a video coordinator with the Seattle Storm, like what did that role look like in terms of like coming off of being almost an assistant coach, having those experiences to now going to the video room with the WNBA team, and kind of adding that new skill set to your arsenal of being able to do video work? Was it kind of, did the skills from a assistant coach really transfer over to that? Did that help conversely with being an assistant coach? Like how did that play together?
Yeah, I think it helped a lot tremendously. I think the Seattle Storm are especially forward thinking in terms of how they like to run things on the basketball side. They try to run a more NBA style offense. We have a roster that was more conducive for like NBA style. You know, if anybody watches the WNBA, you see more than not traditional 4s and 5s, you know, back like, think like 90s NBA basketball where you have Charles Oakley. For all your New York fans, right, it's like Charles Oakley and Patrick Ewing or Anthony Mason at the 4, and like, you know, the big lumbering. I mean, they're still mobile, right? But like it's not like today where you have like PG Tucker as your 4, you know, kind of thing. So for us, we have 2 players like Brianna Stewart, who's an MVP, and then Natasha Howard. So we've had those 2 for the last 3 years, and they essentially are wings. they're center-sized, 5-sized wings, basically. And so they create a lot of havoc, both offensively and defensively. So a lot of the concepts that I've grasped and just taken from the NBA and G League, was able to kind of transfer that and help institute some of those things. They already had those principles in because the coach before the one now, Dan Hughes, the coach before him, Jenny Busick, who's an assistant for the Dallas Mavericks, she actually instilled a lot of Rick Carlisle's principles. So they already had some things in place, and I kind of just added to that and helped evolve those concepts a little bit more. But I think it was good because, you know, Dan brought me in and he trusted where I've been from. He'd gotten good recommendations from, you know, my connections and just our mutual friends. And so I think just from day one, he was really good about giving me full autonomy on what I was doing. And then also just giving me leeway, having the freedom of just setting up these projects or just coming to him with ideas and concepts. You know, I didn't quite have the voice that maybe an assistant coach does. You know, I have my own player development players that I work with before and after practice, but in terms of like inside of practice, I wasn't really talking that much that first year. This past year when we were in the bubble was when my role was probably the most expanded. Technically, I was an assistant coach past bubble, so I had, you know, my hand in scouting reports and film sessions and walkthroughs and all that stuff in practice. So it's evolved in the last 3 years. It's changed, and one of the vital relationships that I have is with Sue Bird. Not a lot of teams have essentially a player coach on the floor, both NBA and NBA. Like in the NBA, it's essentially like LeBron and, you know, maybe like KD or something, or like Steph. But for our side, it's like Sue is next level, right? So it's like collaborating with her and making sure that she's prepared for games. So just giving her ideas, because her mind is crazy how it works. She's like a basketball savant in the sense that LeBron is. And so she thinks the game in a whole another level. So you always have to try to give her ideas to spark those, just kind of make sure she's prepared for every single game. So I think just the whole experience with the Storm has been very unique to other places, and it's given me a lot more freedom than maybe other teams wouldn't have. And I'm pretty thankful for that, because sometimes it's hard because you don't want to be, you understand you want to be great in your role, but you also don't want to be also restricted to that role, and which I haven't been just restricted to just like staring at a screen all day long, which is great.
Definitely, that's what's so cool about it. When Coach Hughes had come on the show a few months ago, he actually, when I'd asked him about his staff and what goes behind building a great staff and all that, I was pleasantly surprised at how really thought out and long his answer was. He really was passionate about what goes into building his staff and making it work the way it does. And I could see that, of course, with what you just said about how he kind of gave you the reins and said, okay, your title might be this, but he saw how much more you could do, which is awesome. I'm thinking over to what you're doing now with the Erie BayHawks. Everything with the past bubble. Obviously, you just came back a little while ago. I'm curious as to, you guys made a good run obviously in the playoffs. A month of being there, away from family, also, but like with all these other G League coaches, all these players, kind of just being in the midst of everything going on and seeing so much happening. Can you kind of just give us a quick walkthrough of what that bubble life was like, and kind of what your roles with the team, just most recently in the bubble?
Yeah, so maybe my experience was even more unique because I'm probably one of the few people that had two bubble experiences, and some of the staff in this bubble, like they work for an NBA team, so they were in the NBA bubble and then they were in this G League bubble. So I think mine's different because for all intents and purposes, the NBA bubble was pretty glamorous compared to these two bubbles. Compared to the WNBA bubble and compared to this bubble, I think it was glamorous just because, like we all know the NBA is a multi-billion-dollar business. So they have all these resources they can throw at these guys. And plus it was longer. And so they had to find ways to give these players outlets and stuff like that. So for me, it was a little different just because in the WNBA bubble, it was still good. We were actually an IMG Academy out in Bradenton, Florida, and we had a lot of amenities that were good. Like I would say I would rank that right just behind the NBA bubble, considering where it was, right? But like in terms of the G League bubble, it was like a race to the finish. It was a sprint right from the start because it was like I think 15 games in 24 days. We were there, a little bit earlier to quarantine, and we had like a week to 10 days or something like that for training camp. But yeah, it was pretty wild because you had to prepare, you had to make sure you were doing film sessions during quarantine just to make sure like these guys were on the same page. Once we hit the court running, we had to put in concepts so that way we didn't have to re-explain them when we were on the court. We could just say, hey, we're doing this and this in our pick and rolls, like let's execute it right now. We're doing this on offense. We're running this in our transition. No, like let's execute that right now. Like we didn't have to explain it over and over again. So that part helped. But I think it was, as a coach, I mean, the way I describe it is I personally love it because I'm a basketball junkie. That's the way I like it. Like I like waking up and just thinking about basketball, knowing that go grab my breakfast, go sit in our team room and start breaking down film for whatever the day is ahead for us. For some people, in both bubbles, both players and staff, right? It's like a lot of people need outlets. A lot of people need some sort of distraction. They can't have basketball all day long. And not to say that they don't love basketball, but it's just not like what's on their mind, not driving them every single day. So, in that saying that, a lot of people had some issues, and especially in a situation where they hadn't been in bubble before, like it's just tough because like I don't want to compare it to jail, but there's some semblances of being in jail, right? It's like if you're going to stay in your room, you're looking at four walls a day. Like I guess theoretically you can roam around outside whenever you want, but it's like there's like a security guard here, you can't go past here. There's a security guard over here, you can't go past here. So it's like you are confined to this space. But the basketball side, I loved it. It was quick. It was boom, boom. Like I said, 15 games in 24 days. It was like we had 5 back-to-back games where it's just like you're just coming. Like there's very little practice time in the middle, and you had to be very cognizant of players' health. And even in games, you had to make sure like you weren't overloading guys, especially on back-to-back games, not their minutes weren't crazy and stuff like that. So all in all, I think for me, it was a great experience. We finished better than last year, and I think we grew individually and as a staff. So that's all you can really ask for.
Oh, huge. And thinking about being in two bubbles, everyone always talks about one. I think one executive that I saw said it's the best team project I'd never want to do again, or it's the most well-organized team project I'd never want to do. So definitely so impressive to think that you were in both bubbles and going through all that. Obviously, with the Storm, with the BayHawks both going very deep, with the Storm obviously winning the championship. So it's incredible to think about all that taking place. I'm kind of curious when it comes to the way the BayHawks run things. When Coach Ryan came on the show, we really spoke a lot about offensive rebounding and a lot of the principles that go behind that with the team. As an assistant, do you work a lot with that? Have you kind of seen like maybe how he sets up or how you would set up a practice with that being the focus? That's just something that when we talked about that, I never really understood. Obviously, you hear Dennis Rodman in the doc talking about the ball with this way, that when you're like, wow, it's a science. But hearing how actually you guys are coaching it in the modern day in 2021 was really impressive. If you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so his concept of tagging up, right, is basically essentially the way some people interpret it when they hear it is that, oh, you're just crashing offensive boards. But the way he organizes it is a little different, right? So there's a little bit of there's strategy to it. It's just like playing defense, right? One thing that you're taught when you're a young kid is, right, staying between your man and the basket. So it's the same idea. Once you shoot the ball on the offensive end, you want to make sure you stay between your man and the opposing basket, which is on the other end of the floor. Anytime you get on the inside, you're kind of toast, right? So they already have a head start. And if you, a lot of people in the NBA, they talk about your first 3 steps or first 2 steps, like especially out of the corners. It's like, if you don't get out of the corners when the shot goes up, you're pretty much toast, because me in a foot race with Russell Westbrook is not going to end well. You know what I mean? Like I could even get a head start at half court, but I'm pretty sure he'll still beat me to the other end of the baseline if he gets the ball in full head of steam. So, but like that being said, the concept of it is good. I think you have to coach it right from the start, and you have to hold players accountable, because it's so weird. Like you're taught growing up to get back. You hear coaches, get back, get back, get back. But for players, like you have to break that habit and say like, oh, we're crashing now. We're going to crash the board. So like a lot of times in the beginning, like especially your point guard will take like a few steps back. Instead, they need to be actually going forward and pushing into their players. So essentially tagging up is like, you want to, if you're not shooting the ball, you want to push your player in the back, not push them, but like wedge them when they're lower back. You want to get behind them and kind of just nudge them into the paint and try to squeeze it. So like especially if this day and age when there's so many threes being shot, like threes are going to be long rebounds, right? So you can wedge them in and push them in a little bit lower, then the ball bounces out towards you. There's a few guys who are super athletic or just hard-nosed and energy guys that you can call, what Ryan says, go get them guys, or go get it guys. And ways basically none of the rules that I just said apply to them. Like they just literally are reckless, like Dennis Rodman. They just go in there and just crash crazy. But for the most part, everybody else is wedging their guys. And yeah, again, those go get it guys, you can't have more than 2 probably. Because if you have like 3 go get it guys, and it's like, now you're just giving up layup after layup in transition. So the tagging up is essentially that. You're just trying to make sure that you're staying between your man and the basket. And then once maybe your man does get the ball, now you're in position to kind of slow them up by giving them a little bit of light pressure, and then while everybody's getting back. Because one thing is that if you don't tag up, like if you're kind of no man's land where you're like at half court and your man gets the ball, you're not tagging up, but then everybody else is tagging up, but they also took off. Now, like if you don't pressure the ball, then they can just see easily and they can throw like that football pass or that outlet pass down the court. So now if you're at least up and tagging up as a point guard or wing or whatever, now when your man actually gets the rebound, then you can be there to kind of pressure the ball and cloud their vision and stop them from passing that, full court pass. So there are a lot of benefits to it. I don't know, Ryan has the numbers on the balance between, second chance points versus giving up transition points. And I think he's broken it down to where like there is a benefit to it. The one thing I will say, and I would be curious, it's an interesting theory, is that I think it might work better in college and high school, just because of the sheer athleticism overall isn't as crazy as it is in the NBA. Like even in Europe, I think it works because the athleticism isn't crazy. Like I said, if I'm tagging up against Russell Westbrook, if I'm tagging up against John Morant, I'm pretty sure if I'm just neck and neck with them to start, they're beating me down the floor. Like I don't care. Like if I'm right there, they're probably going to beat me down the floor. Whether they have the ball or not, foot speed, they're going to beat most people down the floor. So it's an interesting part of that, because I wonder if an NBA team did it, like how much that would actually be a detriment, tagging up against those athletic guys and letting them just leak out. Because as people know, if you turn the ball over, or again, if you miss an offensive rebound or you take a bad shot, like in the NBA, it's like an automatic layup guaranteed. So I wonder about that, what would happen.
It's incredible to think about the concept and how it all plays hand in hand. I'm curious too, though, about being one of the few coaches that is in the WNBA and the G League at the same time, and how those seasons play, in terms of schedule wise are separated, which is how you're able to do both. What does the offseason look like for a coach like yourself who's working with both teams? Are you working with one and then the other on the offseason, training players? Is it kind of, do you split your time and do both? How does that kind of what does the timeline for that look like?
Yeah, so for me, I don't really have an off season. It's kind of crazy. Back when I kind of started all this, and the very first question you asked me about my career and just how I got started, like when I got into this, I didn't even think about like the NBA at all. I thought about just college. I wanted to be in Division I. It didn't matter, low major, high major, mid major, whatever it was. That's what I kind of wanted to be. And so like to be where I'm at right now is kind of crazy, which is like every day I'm kind of pretty grateful for. And so I don't take it for granted, and I try to maximize everything I can. So not, like you said, not a lot of people get a chance to do what I do, especially for two good teams, right? So for the Pelicans organization, who's on the come up, and then for the Seattle Storm, who's been a championship organization. So to give you an idea, my time frame, you know, like 2018 was between 2018 and 2019 was probably the general template of my year. And basically it's, you know, Seattle Storm from April to about late September. So that's about 6 months, I should say. And so 6 months there, and then getting on a plane or getting in my car and driving to, at that time, Phoenix. So I had to drive down to Arizona from Seattle to start training camp for the Phoenix Suns. And then from there, I had the G League season for basically October all the way to April. And then April, maybe I get 2 weeks to kind of go on vacation, and then jumping right back, going back up to Seattle. So again, April to September, then got the job for the BayHawks. So then I flew to New Orleans and then spent a month there in New Orleans, and then came back to Seattle to grab my stuff, and then was back into Erie, Pennsylvania for the next 7 months. So it's like, if there wasn't any pandemic last year, then it probably would have essentially followed the same kind of pattern. So for me, like, yeah, I'd like to do things in the summer. Yeah, I'd like to, some coaches, you know, train guys in the summer, like you said. Some guys have these projects, or maybe they go overseas and do these things with other players. But for me, it's like, I just want to maximize every little bit of time I can for these organizations, because it's not every day you get a chance to work both leagues and to work with incredible players and staff. So I try to do everything I can to keep a hold of this and just cherish this, and then make sure I'm ready for the next opportunity.
That is so incredible to think about. Being a coach that does both, one of the very few. I mean, it's so unique kind of thinking about how, I mean, you don't have an off season. It's obviously that's all part of the grind. And being a basketball junkie, I'm sure you just wake up every day and you love what you do. So it's great thinking about that. Definitely interesting to see how that would work. And if the one thing, I've obviously heard so many lessons from so many coaches, teams, just full on, just all this knowledge of kind of things I want to bring to my team. This whole concept of tagging up is definitely something that I wish I had a high school season to implement it with. I have to wait a few more months for that to happen now. With hopefully we'll be good to go by the fall to really start. But that's obviously something that I thought was super cool. I mean, just really all these lessons that you share with us. I mean, thank you for going so in depth on some of them, with all the career changes you made, all the titles that you've had, all the experiences that you gained from it. So Coach Perry, thank you so much for coming on the show, because really just the way you went into everything was really, really impactful. And I related to it big time. So thank you so much for coming on.
Appreciate it, having me on.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.